you've made, and what seems to be this new attempt of yours to breathe life into universalism. And maybe you could tell our audience, if you want to just say something, what universalism might mean.
Yeah, I'm interested, increasingly interested in these authors with who have what I call a breathtaking view of the whole. And let me explain what I mean before I go to universalism, what I mean by the whole. These are thinkers, poets, or poets, thinkers, who believe that part of the problems that they experienced in their own cultures, and that I think we experience in our own culture, is the reduction of the world to very limited perspectives. And the mistake that usually professors make and literary critics make, as to put it in rhetorical terms, to mistake the synecdoche for the metaphor, the part for the whole. These are thinkers, Dante, Petrarch, Vico, and then we could add Shakespeare, Cervantes, and so on, who really say you have to take every detail as if it were part of a larger totality, a totality that may not be available to you, but you have to presuppose its existence. So this is why I'm drawn to these authors. Part of the way of being drawn to these authors is that, for instance, take the case of Vico. Vico is usually this 18th century thinker who is of interest to me because he is critical of modernity. Modernity is about to define itself, and I define modernity as the world of political power, the Machiavellian world of violence and power. I define it as the world of a Cartesian world, self-centered, the world, the critique that Vico mounts at Descartes is that Descartes really thinks that the world begins with him. I think, and therefore I am. I find the existence of the certainty of my existence in my thought, and because I says, wait a minute, there is a world that precedes you, there is a world that exceeds your knowledge, there is the world that exceeds your consciousness. So he becomes a serious critic of the modern age. In this critique of the modern age, he finds that he has to find out whether there are universal laws that have to be observed, and so that he can really establish a science. So that you can emphasize science only if you have some sort of, not opinions, but some kind of evidence and rational evidence for the existence of some universal phenomena. He says, well, that which gives history, my idea of history, a sort of scientific and universal value, so I'm describing now what universality means, are certain occurrences in human history. The practice of the burial of the dead, that we are all cultures are involved
Burial
in.
of the dead, yeah.
Burial of the dead, the notion of some notion of the divinity, and some idea of all cultures have some idea of God, and all cultures have there's the presence of a contraction of solemn marriages. And I can even add that what he's really thinking about that, for instance, in Rome, only the patricians were allowed, just to explain what it means, why would solemn marriages be thought of as a proof for a kind of universal, the presence of universals in human history. In Rome, which is what Vico is thinking about, only the patricians were allowed to marry. The slaves were not allowed to marry. And why were they not allowed to marry? So that they could not be able to pass on whatever estates they had accumulated in life to their children. And they would go back to the masters. The estates would go back to the masters. So there was a revolt in order to claim for themselves the right and privilege of contracting solemn marriages so they could pass on to their children and establish families. So that's that to make clear the context about all of this. So Vico realizes has to move outside of what we call the European context of his ideas, Greek and Roman ideas, or the history of Egypt, the Mediterranean, or the history of the Jews. These are the histories that and cultures that appear very heavily and prominently in his new science. And he decides to go on thinking about Latin America, and that's really where and he finds in the reading of Latin America, first of all, one important thing, what we call today Latin America, that the America of the South cannot be simply assimilated to European parameters of thought. It has to be kept as a kind of different from Europe, but at the same time, that there must be some degree of continuity or sameness between the two cultures, which would account for the way in which we approach and are capable of conferring intelligibility, giving some kind of intellectual coherence to a discourse correlating Europe and America. So that's really the argument. In the case of Dante, I was really thinking about the fact that Dante, one of the incredible occurrences in his text is that he's reflecting about the theology of the Muslim world, and I say these things, and the theology of the Hindu world and the Christian. Let me call it more than the Christian. It's the Christian, but I would call it also Judeo-Christian in the sense that he understands that there is a sameness between Jews and Christians from one point of view, that they are both messianic religions. The Jews may think that the Messiah is yet to come, and they may not identify Jesus, if not some kind of preamble of the Messiah, but the Messianic is really what joins them together. So he's thinking about these three religions, and he mounts it, first of all, the openness that a man who writes his text between the year 1305 and 1321, that he should have this awareness about the differences and says, how can they be reconciled? A religion like the Muslim that posits the incredible gulf that nothing can bridge between the divine and the human. On the other hand, he takes the Hindus as the religion of the diffusiveness of God, so that in the long run you cannot really have any claim of evil because God is everywhere. So how do you make moral judgments? And he must posit a world where indeed there is a deep rift between the human and the divine, but it's possible to bridge it. And for him, this is what the incarnation so this is the kind of way in which the breathtaking view of these authors that I study engages the whole world in the belief that we are really all one family, and somehow the possibilities of discourse will depend on the ability to give language to our differences. Differences that seem to be unbridgeable provoke violence. When you think of someone that is altogether different from you, the only way of relating to that someone is through the exercise of power and the exercise of violence. If you think that other people are really superfluous in the sense that they are images of you, you don't want someone who is just exactly like you. That also causes violence. Dante, Vico, I believe Shakespeare, your authors, Euripides, Herodotus, understand that there must be some middle ground where difference and sameness have to be transacted. I don't know if this is clear.
Oh, I understand it. I understand what you're saying perfectly. Let me just be devil's advocate here for a moment and take the position of one of your very bright students at Yale, who says, but look what Dante says about war. Well, look where Dante puts Muhammad.
Yes.
Look where he puts Virgil. What about that kind of judgment where those who somehow don't ascend with him to the beatific vision, Christian beatific vision, are somewhere else in his hierarchy? How do you deal with that?
Well, I deal with it in a very simple way. That first of all, I ought to say, for the benefit of your smart listeners, viewers, is that reams of books have been written, whether or not Virgil has been saved. And by the way, I have to say, I used to have a teacher when I was at the University of Toronto, a Jew who was an exile from Germany, Ulrich Leo, and he was one of the most brilliant men I have ever met in my life. Every time that he read Purgatorio 30, which is the moment where Dante realizes Virgil has vanished from the scene, Beatrice, the woman he loved so much, is arriving. This man, Leo, would read the scene about Virgil, inability to go beyond, and literally start crying every time, would pull out a handkerchief, and I have to remember this man. It's amazing. And because he taught me a lot. He taught me how personal reading is. Reading is not some exercise in fatuity. It engages us, it tells us where we are, involves us in a very deep way. But books have been written because it's inconceivable that in a world of redemption there may ultimately be hell. If there is hell and there are lost people, then redemption has failed. That's very simple. From even a Christological point of view.
Say that again.
In the universe of redemption,
yes.
if there has been an economy of redemption, you cannot go on having people who are redeemed. If the redemption has not occurred thoroughly, then it means that redemption has failed. So there are those who argue that in effect hell is negativity, which will be overcome and moved beyond. Nonetheless, this really forces me to think about the other question that you raised, which is an important question. What about the way he treats Muhammad, which it's the reason why the Ayatollahs will never allow Dante to be read in the Muslim world. Because, well, you have to understand that for Dante, Muhammad was really a Christian, and he had to be viewed in, who rejected Christianity, he had to be viewed within his sense of the division that he operates within the Christian world. At the same time, I have to say, Dante takes a man from Asia Minor, Rufus, the Trojan, who just because Virgil mentions him only once in passing in the Aeneid, and refers to him as the just Rufus. He's a Turk, we would say today. Dante saves him and puts him in the heaven of justice. And then in the heaven of justice, he asks a great question that you will, and I think it answers your question. He has been talking about justice in the world, which is really injustice and the inability for justice to bloom and appear in the world. And then he asks, a man is born on the banks of the Hindus, and he knows nothing about Christ. But this man lives as justly as he possibly can, given the human condition. Why shouldn't he be saved? Where is this justice that would condemn him? And the answer he gives is that the imponderable quality of divine justice, and that no one of us can really say that that Hindu is excluded from the beatific vision. So I think that you have right there a man who is Dante, who is asserting but at the same time questioning the limitations of a man-centered understanding of justice. If the Hindus are saved, so are the good Muslims. And of course, he saves all the Jews, the patriarchs, and the women of Israel, simply because they believed in a Messiah to come. That's enough to have the longing for, or the understanding for the Messianic advent. So,
well, you're a very fortunate man. You found a poet that continually interests you. Can you imagine the day when Dante will no longer interest you?
I must say that all my life I've been trying to get away from Dante because the demands he makes on the readers are so intense and huge. Sometimes I say, well, I'm here to exist, just for the sake of Dante. So I have been moving away. I have been writing books about other authors that you so kindly mentioned as a way of taking some kind of pause from him. So I go back to Dante every time refreshed, and I find things that, I'm coming out actually with another book on Dante, and things that I never...
What is that subject? What is the subject of that?
The subject is
in the minute and a half that we have left.
Oh my! It really is about the question of, I would to put it in one sentence, perspective and infinity. That is to say, how Dante transacts that very modern idea that the world is the world we see, and that the universe is reduced to the spectacle for my beholding, the notion of perspective, that the reduction of the world to a spectacle, with the sense that perspective, though it is history, because it implies the self's position in time and space, is a contraction of the notion of infinity. I'm really back to my concerns with the universals and with the need, very modern need, to assert subjectivity and freedom. I'm interested in combining them together. I think that a good knowledge is the knowledge of perspective and infinity. Dante helps me to formulate these ideas.
Well, with those words on infinity, I think we'll have to close that that interminable way now, and just thank you so much for being with us today. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching.